So welcome, everyone. This panel is going to be about the Congo conflict and consequences. So this is both what's happening in the Congo right now and also what are some of the consequences of that, which Fatima is going to talk about gender violence, which is one of the main things, as you probably all know, that has come out of the conflict in the Congo. So we have two amazing speakers. Many of you know David Sullivan already, which is great because we managed to lose his name tag between time 1 and 2 speaking. So that's the danger of speaking twice for us, I guess. But anyway, so as you all know, this is David Sullivan. He's the research director of the Enough Project. He's researched the Lord's Resistance Army, Sudan, the Congo. Sorry, one sec. Okay. And he's been working with the Enough Project on writing different reports. Secondly, we have Fatima Hassan, who was a former student at Stanford. She graduated 2 years ago. In 2009 to 2010, she worked with the Humanitarian Response Branch of the UNFPA in Geneva as the Hassan and Freeman Spogli Institute International Public Service Scholar. And now she's working on a major research project for a foundation involved in efforts to prevent violence against women in the Congo. She's also working at the Center for Health Policy at Stanford, researching the implications of policy and funding allocations for child and maternal health in protected emergencies. So we're going to start off with Mr. Sullivan talking about the conflict in the Congo in general, and then we'll go into gender violence a little bit more. So if everybody can welcome Mr. Sullivan, thanks.
Thanks and good afternoon, everybody. This afternoon what I'm going to do is go back and really start with the historical context of what's been going on in the Congo, starting all the way back in the colonial era and then bringing it up to the present. First, actually, just as a disclaimer, there's no possible way we can actually cover all of the complexity of Congo's history in one session. The presentation you'll see is almost more of like if you wanted to start a Congo book club, here's some suggestions for where to go with that. But before I get to that, I just wanted to start with one thing, the morning sessions, which were great, left me wanting to reinforce, because there was a lot of talk about how much movement we've seen from the private sector to tackle this problem, and it's very true. We've been working closely with progressive companies like Hewlett-Packard and multi-stakeholder groups like Patricia described, and I think we really have hit an important turning point on this issue, but at the same time we're far from out of the woods. And so I just wanted to read something real quick. So bear with me. The demand for coltan is not going away. As global consumers continue to crave the newest cell phone and the latest computer, high-tech companies will continue to pay top dollar for tantalum capacitors, and their suppliers will continue to take tantalum from wherever it is available. Whether an unregulated industry can effectively police itself based on good faith and written assurances is questionable. But one thing is sure. The links between the cell phones and computers we use every day and the devastation taking place now in the Congo can no longer be ignored. The reason why I'm reading this, which sounds like something like that my group, the Enough Project, has been writing and screaming about for the last couple of years, is because this was actually written in June of 2001, and it was in a magazine called The Industry Standard, which was kind of a dot-com startup magazine out here in the Bay Area. Clearly, the link between cell phones and computers and violence in Congo actually did continue to be ignored. One of the important things about this issue is that it's not new. It's not something that's just been discovered in the last couple of years. And in fact, for much of this past decade, I think there's been a real see no evil, hear no evil approach to problems that are a long way at the end of a complicated supply chain, but that morally we're obligated to respond to. And so as we're kind of looking at all of the different things that are going on right now, I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a long long overdue effort, and that it's a difficult problem that will continue to persist and that we need to really be on top of in a very sustained way if we're going to actually make a difference. Okay, so from that, we'll go to my actual presentation on history of the conflict in Eastern Congo. So we're going to start actually way back in 1885 when European powers divvied up Africa and when what was then called the Congo Free State was created by this guy, King Leopold of Belgium, who basically created his own personal colony in the Congo, and over the course of a couple of decades enacted some horrific human rights abuses, at that time seeking to control and profit from ivory and rubber, which were valuable resources 100 years ago. And the story of that era is incredibly well told by Adam Hochschild, who's a Bay Area local, in this book, King Leopold's Ghost, which I highly recommend. And the best part of that story is actually about one of the first international human rights movements that started around the atrocities going on in the Belgian Congo at the time, and the international efforts that actually helped to wrest Congo from King Leopold's personal control. It was then taken over by the actual Belgian government. The level of atrocities diminished, but you still had a deeply exploitative system that took over from there. I'm just running through whole eras of history right now, so apologies for that. But after the end of the colonial era, Congo's next kind of unfortunate fate was to be caught up in Cold War politics in a major way. Congo achieved independence in 1960. Patrice Lumumba was the first democratically elected prime minister of the Congo, and at the time, Congo became a sort of hot spot in the Cold War, with both the Soviet Union and the United States seeking advantage on the African continent, which, with the end of colonialism, has sort of been opened up as a free zone between the powers. Almost immediately upon achieving independence, you had various secession movements break out. You had a Congolese army that was mutinying and which was an instrument of violence and oppression rather than protection of the people, patterns that we're going to see again and again. In a very pretty disgraceful period of history, you actually had Lumumba first overthrown in a coup and then killed in a plot that was supported by both the Belgians and the United States. And for a particularly unique perspective on this time, there's a book, Congo, Chief of Station Congo by Larry Devlin, who was actually the CIA station chief in Kinshasa at that time. So not necessarily the only, I would not recommend it as the only piece of thing to read about that period, but certainly a unique perspective. Following the Lumumba era and the coups in 1960 and 1965, Joseph Mobutu emerged as the dictatorial leader of what he then renamed Zaire and ruled for 30-some years, and with significant support from the United States, who saw him as a bulwark against the Soviet Union and a Cold War ally. Mobutu is the guy that came up with the word kleptocrat for. He sort of systematically exploited all of the resources of the state for his own personal enrichment and the enrichment of his supporters. He very adroitly used divide and rule tactics to prevent anyone from challenging him. And the Mobutu era, again, in the book club, is masterfully recounted in Taylor Wrong's book, In the Footsteps of Mr. Kurtz. When the Cold War ended, folks like Mobutu suddenly found themselves on the outs as their former sponsors in the United States and the West suddenly pushing for democratic rule.